and Government Relations Committee this evening for the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. And we're going to call this meeting to order. Can we verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
And this would be the time that we would have an opportunity for citizens to speak. Did we have any? We do not have any this evening. So let's get right into the agenda. Our first action item then would be the approval of our minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Oh, sorry.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Voigt. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I was an aye, sorry, that passes 4-0. So then let's move on to our first action item this evening, which would be the policy number 2430, which would be district-sponsored clubs and activities.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. These first two policies are in the 2000 series. They generally be dispersed to teaching and learning. However, because we're fortunate to have two of our athletic directors here this evening, we move them with Dr. Piasek's approval from TNL back over to the policy committee, because the gentleman will help us understand those two as well as one of our tabled policies from last month, which was 8800 religious and patriotic ceremonies and observances. They'll help us with that one too. So I'm going to invite them up to the table. From Waukesha South, we have Mr. Dan Schreier, and from Waukesha West, we have Mr. Kyle Lemieux. And we'll start with the first one, which is 2430, district-sponsored clubs and activities. And essentially what we're talking about here is updating language permitting use of the district logo and other intellectual property when in compliance with the policy to be consistent with what our current guidelines are internally. So that being said, I'm going to let Mr. Lemieux kind of just walk us through that a little bit, and then we'll be happy to try and answer any questions you have.
Yeah, thank you for having us this evening. Part of this policy is rooted in some work that we've actually been doing for a number of years now. It's just bringing the text within the policy maybe to match some of our practice and make it broadly known instead of just our athletic director meetings as we get together here on a frequent basis. But when it comes to representation of the district, we have long talked about the idea that when a club, activity, a sport team, even a youth feeder or group that has a tight association to our district, we care about the way we look, the way we represent. I once heard someone say, it doesn't matter if it has our exact name on it, you can throw junior in front of it, whatever you might have. To the average observer, they're going to tie it to School District of Waukesha, Waukesha West, Waukesha South. So with that, we started work long ago. Specifically, this was born from our youth sport groups to say, all right, if you would be classified or designated as a youth feeder, here are the things that we would require of you. And that would include elements such as having their own insurance on file so that the district was not responsible for the coverage of those programs. It would involve a tight alignment from a philosophy standpoint with the current head coach of that sport program, seeing that we would like to develop this consistency from the top down to develop a solid program. And then likewise, when they use our imagery, our logos, the things that represent us, it's not something that we want to see manipulated. And so we've held fast on that, and actually most recently at the high school levels, we've even started to create essentially what I would call branding guides, where we've identified, all right, at Waukesha West, it's not just royal blue, it's Pantone 286C. And this is the one we use, and this is how we use it. Here's how it's, appropriate for you to manipulate that logo and have some autonomy while at the same time not going too far outside the lines. And so we're doing that across the board at each of our sites as kind of a guinea pig project of sorts to expand further. But that, of course, ties directly with any School District of Waukesha insignia at the same time. So that's really the root of kind of what we're getting at here, that when you represent us in full, and we want it to look that way in all appearances.
Any comments or questions? Would like to get us started here. I guess I'll start then. One question I know has come up in the past would be the use of logos and how people approach you and ask for permission to use these things. Can you give us a little bit of background in some of the, examples of clubs and activities where?
Sure. Sometimes I like to refer to it as the Wild West because there's certain programs that we have structured communication with, we have an aligned purpose. There's others that unfortunately would look to use it for their own benefit. For example, one of my pet peeves is when I walk into local stores and I see a sweatshirt that says Waukesha West across the front. I say, well, we didn't make that. And whoever did, I'm not happy with how it turned out, right? But to the casual observer, they see that and think, well, Waukesha West must be trying to sell their merchandise in our store. And so we have gone even to the length at certain times of going through cease and desists with different vendors to make sure that we have some element of control. But unfortunately, it has been reactive, I would say, to this point, just because we're going to deal with it as it comes to our attention. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing a time where with the number of uniforms and logos that are coming up, it's coming up in I would say a faster manner than it was in 20 to 30 years ago. So people want to have some creativity with what that logo might look like, what that T-shirt might look like, what the design might look like. So the project that we're looking at is aligning to have logos that the athletic directors agree upon, that the coaches agree upon, and then if you are a school-approved club or athletic program, you're using one of those logos to represent the school instead of a logo that's been created somewhere else.
We've even worked with our vendors and our apparel groups where they've gotten to hear from us enough to say, all right, if we get this as your proposal, we'll go forward with it. But if it's anything off the beaten path, sorry, we need to press pause. I need to get the school approval first before we would go ahead and print that. So there are some mechanisms at work, but unfortunately, because of the widespread use, it can happen time to time.
And the designs are out there. People find them. I would say I get an email every couple of weeks or months asking for use, and then I'll connect with Kyle and Carl to see what our practices and policies are around how they're being used.
Ms. Foyt?
When you talked about the branding guides, like the right shade of blue, et cetera, do you actually have them get approval of the potential logos that they're thinking about using as a use for it or whatever?
So what we've outlined in those branding guides is not only the specifics for essentially a vendor or an apparel company to use, so these types of color shades and things like that, but also what's permissible to manipulate it. Like, are we okay with text going over the top of it? If so, where and how? Each of our logos is unique, so North has the star. Well, can we do something with the star besides have that? On West's paw, there's a round shape. So what do people want to do? They want to make it into a ball, right? Well, sometimes it looks all right, and sometimes it doesn't. So we've kind of worked through that. There's a lot of times, too, where people that might not have the greatest experience with graphic arts, they might try to distort the figure of it, right? So now all of a sudden that ends up online and you think, well, that doesn't represent us very well. So it's really become kind of a collective effort to control that. And really I think where this leads also is how we present ourselves on our websites, on social media, and all of those individual accounts, being able to say, if we're going to do those things, here's our look, here's our brand.
Are they actually trademarked or no?
So that has been a discussion point for the last month or so, that we're going to begin looking into that process to see where that can go.
Any other questions or comments on this particular policy? I'd be looking for a motion then for policy 2430.
I so move approval of policy 2430.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Borowski. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Passes 4-0. Our next action item then would be policy 2431, our interscholastic athletics and district activities policy.
All right. Well, the gentlemen are going to help us with this one, too. This is an internal suggested revision, and it's clarifying how we are currently doing business, where, again, the policy just currently doesn't match the way we're doing grade checks and athletic eligibility pieces. So I'll turn it over to the guys so they can explain, and maybe as you're explaining, we can kind of walk through where we're talking to
Yeah.
in the policy.
You bet. So I'd refer you to the second page under athletic eligibility, B, item 3, and it's in the last sentence that has the green where it says, all grade reviews will use the most recent quarter or progress report posting to determine eligibility. No 5-day grace period will be given when checking semester grades. And so what this traces back to is anytime a student registers for athletics in the school district of Waukesha, we go through an eligibility process. We're checking off their physicals, their fees, and so on, including their grades, where we must have at least a 2.0 and can't have more than one failing or incomplete grade. What we wanted to make sure was clear, especially with the changeovers that can happen in our offices at times, is to make sure that every student had the same and appropriate shake at becoming eligible for their sports season. And so what'll happen is on the opening day of a sports season, when those tryouts and practices begin, we take a look at the grades of all students in that sports season. When, let's say, we come upon a student who does not meet that mark of 2.0, or they have multiple failing or incomplete grades, they are given essentially a 5-day window, that first week of tryouts or practice, to be able to rectify that situation before we would then take another look on, as outlined here, on Friday to make a final determination. The reason we did that was when we shifted our grading practices years ago, we saw that there was a lot of fluidity in the way that grade books might be managed. And the only thing preventing you from being eligible might be a certain assessment that you weren't present for on a certain day, or maybe it didn't even get entered into the grade book yet. And so being able to deal with that reality and not put students in a position where they were penalized for something that might be out of their control, we gave this grace period. So likewise, a student's grade book could dramatically change based on the timing of assessments and what else is happening at the beginning of March when they're starting track season, as an example. And so we want to give them every opportunity to, again, be part of that group. That's especially important because when we declare someone ineligible by WIA rule, they must sit out of that sport for 15 school days. So you look at the sprint that most sports seasons are, and it's costly. It should be, but it's costly. And so that's the rationale there. The note about the no 5-day grace period when checking semester grades is because, as we would tell kids all the time, you know, your progress reports, it's the end of the first quarter, it's a halftime score, however you'd want to frame it. A semester grade is a final score. A semester grade is not changing. And so that's what's transcripted, that's what we will use. You go with what you have, and we'll carry on from there. So that's been our common practice, but at the same time, we were realizing internally that there may have been times when we were referring to different grades at different moments, and we wanted to be sure across all 3 schools that we were consistent and accurate.
Ms. Voigt.
How forgiving are we with the financial obligations for students that do have, you know, like low-income family situations?
Yep, so as outlined here, and Dan, you can certainly add in some of the process itself too, but we have always approached it where we want to have a plan. And so let's say a student has a significant amount of money that was owed from the start of the school year. It might be fees, maybe something happened with their iPad along the way. You know, we see education-based athletics as one of the connecting elements they might have to that school. And if we're pushing them aside because of those fees alone, we've always taken issue with that. And so that being said, there's a responsibility there. And so as long as we have a plan, as long as we've come to an agreement about essentially a payment schedule of how this will look by the completion of that sports season, typically it's gone really well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of the document, but we have a document that's an athletic fee or fee waiver that students come to the office, and we work with families, parents, the student to fill out a narrative as to what the plan is why they're interested in playing the sport, and then we work with them to get them engaged and get them involved in the sport.
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, I was just curious about how you planned on covering this. Were you planning on going like one section at a time and explaining, or are we now open to ask questions about anything that's in here? Because I don't want to jump ahead on.
Great question. I think the grade revision is probably the most significant modification of the policy, so certainly if you have questions, fire away.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thanks. So I guess I'm curious about the section under violations requiring additional penalties, and it deals with, there was some language added indicating the need, apparently to make more specific penalties around illegal or controlled substances. Could you just help me understand what drove the need to include that? Are there controlled substances that are not illegal?
Not illegal.
That created issues?
To be honest, I'm not exactly sure the element of that change.
What section is that?
That might have been
Sorry,
a
it's page,
Neola recommendation.
it's right before the appendix,
Okay.
the second to last section. It's more curiosity than anything. I just
Sure.
wondered if there was something that precipitated that change that.
Are you looking under violations requiring additional penalties? Is that
Correct.
the? Okay.
Yes, correct.
Dr. Siebert, I'm not sure if you know, that might have been just a grammatical or consistency change.
Actually, that was a board member suggestion that reviewed this.
So like we said, these went through TNL. They had some discussion, at least between Jody and Dr. Piasek.
Okay.
And then we bumped them back over here because the guys were going to be here. So I don't know exactly where that came from either, but I don't think it's a bad addition by any stretch.
No, I was just curious if there was something
It's a
that
good
had
question. Yes.
precipitated the need to include that language.
Perhaps it was just to clarify what's there. I mean, I don't see any issue with it. Was your concern just that it was,
I don't even know that so much that it was a concern
trying to understand what it
in
was?
terms of the language. I had a concern for, were there events or things that were occurring that had driven a need to change the policy? Because I would have assumed, in my reading of it, I would have assumed if you're talking controlled substances, you're talking about illegal substances, but
Sure.
maybe there is some consistency there that was necessary just for precision.
Were there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Mr.
Yes, if we could just go back to, under D, financial obligations. So we started to touch on that. I just wanted to get a little further clarification. So D1, it says the established athletic fee is required per athlete per year. Fee may be partially waived for students who are eligible to participate in the free reduced lunch program. I don't know the criteria off the top of my head. I don't know if anyone else does, of who qualifies for that. And I guess second question, which is probably a little bit more important, could there be a situation where a family does not qualify for that, but then is having some kind of financial issue? And you may have touched on that, to where we would still consider some type of leeway or whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's important to note that we don't know all of the students in our buildings who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and we don't want to make any assumptions about students who are able to pay athletic fees or are not able to pay athletic fees. And, you qualify for free and reduced lunch based on income levels and family size. So we certainly have students who could be qualifying for free and reduced lunch, but might not have that money to pay for the $150 athletic fee. So regardless of if students qualify for free or reduced lunch, they do have the opportunity to fill out the waiver or the payment plan that provides them that opportunity to explain, their need, why they're interested in the sport, and can either use a reduced fee or a payment plan, like Kyle mentioned earlier, so that they can still participate in that sport.
So the actual numbers, Mr. Borowski, a family of four with a household income of $36,075 per year or less qualifies for free. And then if the income level is between that 36,075 and 51,388 for the family of four, they can receive the reduced price meals.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering, based on what you said, should we be changing the wording on that to whether they qualify for that, or, basically, if they fill out the form, it sounds like you're going to consider it. I don't know if that's something that
I think,
the committee thinks is important, but it sounds like it's not just the free and reduced lunch program. It's like if they fill out the form or have some kind of financial hardship, they can potentially.
as I was reading the revision, that's how I interpreted it, where it used to say the fee may be partially waived for free and reduced lunch participants, meaning that they have gone through and completed the form process, whereas now it says the fee may be partially waived for students who are eligible to participate in the free and reduced lunch program. So they may not have gone through and carried out, and we have come upon that from time to time where we know or believe to be true that they would be a candidate to receive these fee reductions, but for whatever reasons, their families have not gone through with
Sure.
that process, but we still want to help meet them where they're at.
No, and I understand that distinction, but it also sounds like it still could be other people or other families that may not qualify for that program, whether they fill out the paperwork or not, but still might have some kind of financial hardship. Or am I wrong on that? It sounds like you're saying,
No, I think I think that's still the case. And when you're looking at, a family with 3 high school students paying $150 for each athlete at the high school, I think that can be costly for families.
all right, so I guess just what I'm asking the committee, in light of that, should we change the wording or just add something to indicate, I don't know, families with financial hardship? I guess I haven't thought it through as far as what I would say, but.
Are you thinking something like, or are experiencing financial hardship, like as another qualifier?
Yeah, yeah, so at the end of that, students who are eligible to participate in the free reduced lunch program or facing other financial hardship. I guess the question is, do we think it's important enough to just make that distinction?
I guess one thing I might think about is the free and reduced lunch program has very specific criteria financially. If you put in something that just refers to financial hardship, it might be a little hard to interpret. And that's where I think we trust that the gentleman with the form work with the kids, but I certainly want to hear from you. It's your decision.
Yeah, I also don't want to open it up to
Yes.
Mr.
being
Watt,
abused, but.
I'm sorry.
Yes, so let me just kind of clarify process a little bit. So you have a student athlete whose parents or guardians approach the coach or somebody and indicates, we're going through a tough period right now, whatever that might be. My assumption is somebody has the discretion to make some determinations about waiving some or partial fee outside of looking at the individual's eligibility for free or reduced lunch. Is that a true statement?
I would say true in that we've used our discretion to look at every individual situation, but unless they have qualified for the free and reduced lunch program, we have not necessarily manipulated the total of the fee. We've maybe changed the timing of payment.
Okay, so, and who ultimately makes that decision? Is it the athletic director?
We've managed it internally.
Okay. But it sounds like at some level, there is a requirement that they demonstrate where they qualify relative to free or reduced lunch. Is that true? So that's going to be, that will precede any discussion around perhaps timing of full payment or something along those lines. Is that true?
Correct.
So, given that, I think, since the form sounds like it's used in any event to evaluate eligibility, I would, to Dr. Siebert's point, I would think we could run ourselves into some challenging situations with families without specific criteria established and open ourselves up to questions of fairness and so forth.
Mrs. Boyd?
I'm wondering if we, not say that, but say that there is a form available if you would want to apply for a waiver, and that there is a waiver form that exists. Because if you don't know that, you wouldn't even, I would never have known that there was a waiver form, based on the way the policy is written.
I guess the question then is how, if a student, I think before you said that you don't necessarily know who fills out this.
We do not have access to that information in our offices. Yeah, we need to
So
request confirmation.
we might, I don't know if we'd be getting into a situation where, we're trying to do better by our students. And we may be putting up some type of barriers here where our directors and principals can't make those decisions internally. If we start to add language here, then, the form that we have has to reflect that, which I think was Mr. Watt's point. So, and I think to Mrs. Voigt's point, how do students know that they may be eligible to participate, knowing that they can't currently come up with the fee? I would assume they approach someone and say, hey, I'd really like to play, but I just can't right now. So, is that kind of how it's handled? I don't know if anything that we can do policy-wise helps you make this easier for students. Maybe there is.
Typically, and unfortunately, the onus falls on that student or family first to initiate that conversation. When that conversation is initiated, we might delve into the questioning of, where are you at? Has your family completed this form to see if you qualify or not? We might coach them through that process if necessary, and then ultimately try to make a declaration one way or the other of, okay, how do we get you out on the field, out on the court? Let's put together a plan, so that even if that part of the process is in limbo, we can still keep them moving.
Are there any other questions or proposed revisions in this area that we would want to discuss more thoroughly, or should we move on to other sections if there's any other questions or comments? And without some more direction, I don't know that we should. Go ahead, Mr. Watt.
Yeah, so perhaps the concern I may be hearing from other members of the committee are concerns about people who need some sort of accommodations, whether that's driven by their eligibility on, for free or reduced lunch, or just some one-off financial situation in the family. I wonder if we might want to look at D, the financial obligations, 2, where it discuss all financial obligations with the district or school must be settled prior to participation in a sport. Now, when I read that, settled to me means paid, but I'm wondering if perhaps, if there is language change to be made, it revolves around that, where, and I don't know without thinking through it what that would look like, but something along the lines of approved arrangements with the school district have been met, or yeah, something along those lines. Does that help with those other concerns we may have had to address it there instead?
Ms. Voigt.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. You like to say settled through the fee waiver process, or something like that. A couple words to say that, go to the athletic director and see what can be done, because it has to be, what does settled mean,
So,
Go ahead, Mr.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. So it sounds to me, though, that if I understood what you said before, you won't waive the fees unless they truly qualify, or discount them unless they qualify for free and reduced lunch.
I would
Right.
say that's accurate, because if we reduced and they didn't qualify for the free and reduced program, that's where we would potentially run into inconsistency from
Right.
family to family versus a payment plan, we can have that, that give.
But it sounds to me, if I heard everything else correctly, there may be situations where a family can make arrangements to pay off schedule, but for the full amount.
Correct.
Of the fees. So I guess I'd like to leave the form out of any revision and just indicate that the fees either need to be paid or arrangements need to have been approved through the respective school or district.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a better change.
So as a suggestion, could we say all financial obligations with the school or district must be settled, or you use the term arrangements, arranged, Mr. Watt, or a payment plan established prior to participation in a sport, something to that effect?
Yes.
What do you guys, would be comfortable for you?
Does that, I guess, let me ask, does that help you at all in terms of, could you run into situations where people may question whether or not they're eligible to play if they're on one of these sort of arrangements or payment plans with the language that exists in the policy?
I don't believe so, but only more so because it's how we've carried out in practicality, day in and day out in the office. When I read settled, I would also raise a similar question of how clearly is that defined? Because to me, as the overseer of that potential payment plan, settled could mean that we have finished making arrangements. And so I'm not sure what the exact language might be to modify this part of the policy, but that's how I would read it or wish it to be read, that it's either been paid in full or arranged by site administration, arranged with the site administration, something to that effect.
I do have one, so this statement, point two here, is applying to all students, okay? And if we were to modify this to help those that need our help, we're also taking away potentially, and, you know, you can tell me if this maybe happens, those students or families that are very capable of paying, that have paid in the past, and are just put it off. And so now we have a student that wants to participate or has participated in the past and paid in the past. So this is applying to everyone every student in the district. And I don't want to give the impression that we're going to be lax for those who don't need our help, when the spirit of this conversation is to help those that do. So my point being, this is applying to every student in the district. So my concern would only be that if we do modify something here, it would open the door for other students maybe to ask for timing that they don't necessarily need. So that would be the only point that, for the committee's sake, that maybe we're getting a little too far out in front of ourselves for those students here that, you know, are okay to pay. So I don't know what your feedback on that would be. I don't know if, as I think Mr. Watt said, I don't know if what we're trying to do in the wording here is making your job easier or harder or clarifying anything for anyone.
Sure. I could live in many camps on that. I don't know if I would deem it to be necessary or not, but to your question in terms of those that are able to pay and not pay and how this influences the process, the payment of that athletic fee, whether it's done in full up front or through a payment plan, has been very consistent, I would say, across the board. Where we have not necessarily, so when it says all financial obligations with the school or district, well, that might also include elementary annual fees, a book from middle school, right? And so they show up to us with $900 in fees and they want to play football. We in the past have not held them to the standard of clearing that 900 before they participate in football, but because they're so engaged and leveraged to participate in that sport, it opens the door for us to have that conversation. Say, hey, just so you know, this is here too. And now coaches can talk to them and maybe begin to have those bridges built of, hey, this is here, you know, is everything going all right? You guys have a plan on how to do that, right? So it's much more of I think, a support mechanism so that it just doesn't trickle down the road. But unfortunately, there are a fair amount that show up to us with fees in place that, I mean, in an ideal world, they would have a fresh slate.
So we've had a little bit of discussion on this. Is there an amendment we'd like to put forward to change some of the wording here, or?
Yeah, I've got one here that I think takes into account your last
Okay.
concern, and we'll see see what people think. So number 2 then would be stated just as it is. So I'll just state it, I guess. All financial obligations with the district or school must be settled prior to participation in a sport or have a payment plan arranged based on specific financial need. So I'm hoping that targets, hey, they have a specific need, not just want to be late with paying, which I don't see happening really much, but I guess it's possible. I don't know what the committee thinks of that. So we're just adding, at least my suggestion is, or have a payment plan arranged based on specific financial need.
Would there be a second to that amendment?
I'll second it. Then ask you what you think. Is that the wording that would capture what you're currently doing?
I feel like that's how we're operating right now, so I think that's a good suggestion. I'm wrestling with the free and reduced lunch, but I think the suggestion that's on the table is a appropriate one for how we've been operating.
Just to match the reality,
Yeah.
I think the reality is that a policy that brings about fairness and consistency while at the same time gives professional latitude to meet students while they're at,
Right.
that's our ideal situation.
Any other discussion on what we have in front of us? Okay. So, this is what I have. All financial obligations with the district or school must be settled prior to participation in a sport or having a payment plan arranged based on specific financial need. Is that how you had it worded?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the wording of the amendment one more time?
Or having a payment plan arranged based on specific financial need. Go ahead, Mr. Watson.
Yeah, so I always try to think in terms of, are there possibilities to try to take advantage of wording? To create, to maybe avoid responsibility. I'm a little concerned about arrangement without something that indicates that there is actual district approval or site approval for that arrangement. I might, as a parent, feel like I've got a great arrangement, I'm gonna pay you when I feel like it. That may not necessarily be the arrangement that the school district or the school would feel is appropriate. So,
Well, with the,
Yeah,
Mr. Watt, if I could just respond, I mean,
district approved or administrative.
I would hope the way that statement starts, it makes it clear, because it says all financial obligations with the district or school must be settled, but I don't know, maybe that's not clear enough?
Could we add district approved or administrative approved? Administrator approved?
So all financial obligations with the district or school must be settled prior to participation in a sport or arranged through a district-approved payment plan, or administration-approved payment plan, however you'd phrase that.
I think it's fine, it's just, or that's good, it's just that there probably should be something in there about the financial need versus just wanting to set up a payment plan.
Well, if I could, I mean, there could be any number of reasons that someone needs a modified payment plan that may not be financial need. It may just be life circumstances, right? I'm concerned about making it too narrow, and perhaps people feeling as though the only way that they can request a payment plan would be if they fit into a particular financial thing. As you know, the people work with parents and families that need these kinds of arrangements. Is it always a financial need that drives a payment plan, or is it perhaps certain, like, and I'm trying to think, like, maybe someone's got a medical condition that they're working through and there's some uncertainty. There may not be a need yet, but boy, I may have to start some sort of medical care that I don't know the full cost of out of pot. I mean, there is a financial component to that, but there may not be a need that can be established. It may be more life events or uncertainty.
And we don't always
No.
dig through all of those layers with families, right? We go to the extent necessary to make a good judgment and then carry forward. But I would say it's either because they have qualified for the free reduced program, or it's a timing issue. And I would just kind of batch it together. Like, it's a timing issue that we intend, we will. It just can't happen right now. Let's create a plan where it can.
Yeah, and I would just add that, I mean, at least the way I'm thinking about it, a financial need might be temporary, might just be over these next 3 months, my cash flow is whatever it is, for whatever reasons, medical or otherwise. So, I don't know, I guess, I don't think it's that big of an issue, but that's just my opinion.
Ms. Foy?
I like the wording of an administrator-approved payment plan, because then no matter what the circumstances are, if they are a reasonable request, that gives you the latitude to do something about it. You know, so it may not be based on financial need. It may be, that mom fell off the wagon and we don't have any money to pay the fee today, kind of thing.
So the language, we're just going to, your suggestion is to add administrator-approved payment plan?
What
Insert
Kyle
it
had
there.
mentioned, or arranged with an administrative-approved payment plan. Right, was that the wording?
So is the original proposer of the amendment, Mr. Borowski, are you okay with that? Because I think we could just make that
Just
like
make it a friendly,
friendly amendment.
sure. Adding the
I'm not sure what we're proposing now.
administration-approved payment plan. So we're inserting those two words before payment plan, is my understanding. Just to clarify who's making this decision.
Right. And then everything else reads the same?
As of now, yes. So,
So basically, the addition is, or have an administrator-approved payment plan arranged based on specific financial need?
correct, that's my understanding of where we're at. So,
Is that,
one question in regards to this is maybe for Dr. Siebert. Are we creating more paperwork here or a form or, how will this actually go into action other than how it's been for having someone, dealing with the student, within the school as opposed to now having something maybe in writing or maybe not?
Sure. No, I think
Guess
that's a
that's
good
my question.
question, Mr. Zenobia. I mean, I defer to the guys, and if they say that this to me, what I think what it's doing is it's putting it in practice in writing, and it's informing, if a parent looks at the policy, they know, or the guys can use this to be able to say, this is how we make these decisions. And so as long as it's aligned to what they are doing and they feel comfortable with it, then I don't think it's creating any additional work, but it's essentially making the process more clear publicly.
Mrs. Voigt?
This is still the document that all the athletes have to sign before they,
Correct, they all
be
sign
aware
off
of the
on it.
consequences if you do any of the A through Z, A, B.
Correct.
Kind of, list of things. So I'm thinking to have that in there as a communication tool to know that there is a plan, that can be arranged. I think it's just a real positive element of what you're currently doing.
Sure.
Okay. Any other discussion on this amendment? Okay. All those in favor of this amendment as proposed, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That's 4-0 on the amendment. Are there any other areas of the policy we'd like to discuss further? Any other questions or comments? Then I would like to move approval forward for policy 2431 as amended. Do I have a motion?
I have a question first.
Go ahead.
Does this also fit under activity eligibility B? All financial obligations to the district or school must be settled prior to participation in any activity. I know it's athletics is what you were speaking to first of all, but if we had a student that wanted to be involved in mock trial or some other element, other activity, would they have, they have to have their fees paid too. Have you ever done a waiver, experience for them?
I think certainly we'd want to be able to have that option if the situation came about. So I might recommend that we repeat the amendment onto that element of the policy as well.
That's what I was just thinking, that the athletes, shouldn't get a better deal than the other activity.
Is there an area you would suggest adding that, Ms. Voigt, or
Same place at the end.
under penalties?
No, under financial obligations, B
Oh.
under activity.
Activity
You would
eligibility.
add athletics, you're saying?
No.
I'm sorry.
So it's another financial obligation section.
Item B.
Oh, okay.
B, again, it
I'm
starts
lost.
off by saying that all financial obligations to the district or the school,
Okay.
kind of thing. It's just adding for activities as well as for sports.
I will be on the same page here in a second.
So B1,
B1. So activity eligibility,
Ah.
just below where we just.
There you go. Thank you. So under B, Section 1, at the end, we would add the same language that we had under D2. Correct?
right, so the statement, the addition that follows the word sport in D2 now follows the word activity in B1.
Okay.
Yeah.
That fair enough?
That motion, or I can.
Sure, go ahead. Your catch.
All right.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ms. Voigt.
Yeah, I make the proposal that we amend B1 under financial obligations to add the same wording about the arrangement, getting administrative approval for activities as well.
Have a second.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any other discussion before I move forward on that? Okay. All those in favor of adding that amendment to policy 2431, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? 4-0. All right, so we have amended the policy in two places. Is there any other discussion or areas that we would like to address before moving forward? All right. Then I'd be looking for a motion to approve policy 2431 as
I so move.
Second.
moved by Ms. Voigt, seconded by Mr. Wad. All right, so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, passes 4-0. And then we will move on to our action item 8800, which is religious and patriotic ceremonies and observances.
All right, well, thank you. This one, we tabled at our first meeting back in June. Since then, we've had some discussion at the athletic director level around what prayer looks like, so the gentleman will be able to help you understand that from their perspective. And I also ran this policy based on our discussion 2 months ago through our legal counsel. And so they, with the expectation of asking them to help us to say, we want coaches to be able to be around it. We want teachers, et cetera, to be able to be around it. We just don't want them leading it, right? And so I think some of the adjustments that have been made that are now in red are from legal counsel, using words such as shall not conduct, direct, endorse, sponsor, or sanction. And so I think both Mr. Schreier and Mr. Lemieux can kind of talk about what that looks like at the high school level, and we'll see then if this policy fits what it is that we're trying to look for. I thought we had a really good discussion on it last month.
I don't know if there's any specific questions you'd like to start with, but to give a summary of how I feel this policy applies best, you know, you'd probably see it, maybe the classic example would be on a Friday night after a football game, you'll see the teams rally together at the 50-yard line, and at some point you'll see heads bow, and they might engage in a prayer, and then carry on. In all of my 11-plus years of doing this, I've every single time seen that to be a student-initiated process. Coaches are around, everybody's on the field, we're together, but really what it has, I think, become is much more so a demonstration of sportsmanship. And if you're close enough to hear the actual conversation in those huddles, it's one team praising the other or praising everyone, thanking them for a great game. They're thankful that no one got hurt. They're thankful that they had the opportunities that they did. They would then typically engage in a brief prayer, break down, and carry on. And so I think the reason why that probably gains attention is because it's happening at the 50-yard line right after a football game, and it's on full display. And certainly coaches are present and they're in the area, but the leading or directing of that, I've never seen take place or had any concern over in our district.
And the examples I've seen haven't been full team either. It's been groups of players. So maybe 15 guys from South get together with 15 guys from West and take a knee and, like Kyle said, meet at the center of the field. And a couple coaches might be around that area, but we work with coaches to make sure that it's player-driven, player-led, like a player-led ceremony or celebration.
Go ahead. You have a comment, Mr.
So, yeah, just, I guess for clarification and kind of practicality sense of talking this through, you're saying, you know, coaches might be in the area, but it sounds like they can participate, they just can't lead it? So they can take a knee, they can, or whatever it might be? I mean, is that,
I would say that's a fair statement.
Yes.
Yep.
Fair.
okay, if that's the case, I'm wondering if the district shall not conduct, direct, endorse, would that be considered an endorsement by the coach? I mean, I don't know if the endorsement means if they just participate, you know, quietly, that's one thing, or one maybe a description of an endorsement, or it may not be, it might just be participation. You know, endorsing it might be encouraging people to do it, kind of a thing. So I guess I'm just looking for clarification, so I don't know if, because of the wording, can that be interpreted in the incorrect way?
I think what our legal counsel was trying to get at was, from a district perspective, we're being very clear that we don't endorse or sponsor. But what we're doing in practice at that level that the gentlemen are talking about, we're essentially saying, as long as they're not leading it as the adult, it's fine for them to be there and to continue to support their players and be around it as long as it's student-led. And the endorse and direct, conduct, sponsor, or sanction language is specifically applying to the district, not to the individual teacher or coach at that particular event. if that makes sense. It's kind of like it's separating it out and then saying they can be around it. We just don't want you, we don't want you leading it. You know, it'd be no
Sure.
different than the prayer around the flagpole when kids do that, right? A teacher could be out there, but they shouldn't be the one saying, now we're going to say the Our Father, for example. The kids should be leading that.
It's more or less, it can happen, and we allow it to happen without, I guess, encouraging or endorsing it. Is that fair?
Right, right.
Okay.
Dr. Siebert, would it be fair to say that if something like that were to take place, using the example of a coach participating, perhaps even encouraging, that's not, in this case, the district, though, correct?
Correct.
So, I guess the point being, from my brief reading of the decision that brought this about, it does not allow for anyone to say that you can't express your beliefs, even openly. It's not an establishment of, in this case, something religious to openly pray in this case, I think is what this is saying. And my only point in bringing that up is I guess I'm a little bit concerned in the amount that's here to try to spell out that this is not taking place. And yet, the district, and even in the end, you know, the board is not saying, you know, to do this. You know, there's a lot of language here that seems to try to explain why this policy is being amended, but at the same time, I guess my point is how much of this is really necessary, and maybe from a legal counsel perspective of what they've added, did you receive any feedback from them about it? Other than, I see they did some, I think all the red letter changes were theirs from the
Yes.
last time?
Yep.
So I mean, I understand why as a district, and even as a board, we would not specifically direct or endorse or sponsor these activities, but at the same time, any staff member operating within the district that would be found to be doing something considered religious, you know, it's a free exercise if they're, it's free expression. So, I guess I'm a little bit concerned about some of the amount of language that's here trying to clarify that, so.
It's a fair point, Mr. Zenobia. I think maybe 2 points I would point to. At the end of the first paragraph, it says, within the confines to this legal framework, the board adopts the following policy to address the scope of these rights and the district's authority within its own facilities and during events. So it's specific of where it applies. And then the last sentence in the second paragraph, nothing in this policy or its application shall serve to prohibit or interfere with any staff member's free exercise of their religious views in circumstances not covered by this policy. I think that gets to your point of it is a freedom of religion issue, as long as it's clear in those red letters on the second page that as a district, we're not conducting, directing, endorsing, sponsoring, or sanctioning those pieces, but we do understand that in the examples that the athletic directors are giving us, it is okay to be around it. It's just when you're in the district facilities or during events, this is when this policy is trying to say it needs to be student-led and not adult-led. But like any policy, the more words you put in it, right, the more challenging at times it can become.
Any other questions or comments in regards to where we're at?
Did his explanation satisfy your concern?
It does. I mean, there's still a lot here, but I want to jump in front of anyone else that may have other questions or comments on this. No? So, another area of question that I have is, paragraph 2, which talks about where it starts to, I know mine is yellow lettered, but it begins in paragraph 2, district staff members shall not use prayer, religious readings, observance of religious holidays, religious symbols as a devotional exercise or in any act of worship or celebration in any manner that would suggest the district's promotion or establishment of any religion as determined by the district. My concern there is we have this policy that is supposed to deal with religion, and we all roughly understand what that means. But I would argue that that's probably changed a lot in the last even 10 years about, what is religion, what is the observances, what are the symbols, what are the acts of worship and celebration, where in the course of a school year, there are many, many things that are observed and celebrated and, use symbols, and we have perhaps opens a door for a time when staff could use that as an exercise or a devotional. My point is, this language is very vague and broad, and it's not well defined. And so then my concern is, well, we all traditionally know what the point of this policy is. It doesn't treat everything the same. Okay? I would argue that it doesn't treat anyone that would, like the coach praying at the end of the football game, the same as what someone else may view as their religion. And so, my concern is, what is the base language that we could get away with that clearly defines the areas that we need to define without making this too burdensome on the future expression or free ride expression of whomever, staff or student. So I guess my question then is, how much of this policy can we cross out and move forward
Tighten
with?
up a little bit.
It's just, to me, it's a lot of language that, how much of it really needs to be defined when a lot of these words and ideas are not specifically defined at all.
Okay. Well, to your point, if you'd like, I mean, one thing we could do is we could take this back and we could see how much we could minimize it. Some of it is referenced in state statute, some of it is referenced in federal pieces.
Sure.
So we'd have to keep those pieces, but there might be,
Right.
in working with our council, a way that we could really tighten it up, try to make it a little bit more specific and a little more clean. We'd be happy to do that.
I don't know if there's any other questions or comments where we're at on this. From what you just said, Dr. Siebert, I guess part of what I would like to understand from council would be perhaps the definition of some of the things that they're working off of.
Sure.
Being anything that says religious here, followed by holidays, symbols, acts of worship. And then which parts of this are really tied to statute that we must have in place.
Sure.
It's much wordier than the statute than that is cited here. So I guess I would, for my own sake, would want to see some more clarification. I know it's, we'd already had tabled this and come back, and I don't want to be, I don't know if on the administrative side, if what I've said raises any questions or comments from you about things that you've observed, or,
I guess I would only say, I'm not a legal expert in this case law to the point where I would feel comfortable commenting on it, other than the definitions of terms such as direct, endorse, or sponsor, so as we guide and coach our coaches through what is appropriate and inappropriate in their interactions and, the way they go about their business, to set them up for success and knowing the rights that they do have, and at the same time, the boundaries that exist within our school district. So, whether that comes through this policy or maybe it's a guidelines that comes out of this policy.
sure. And I appreciate that, and I do think it's very important to keep that in place. What I would like to see is just a better definition of what it is that we are trying as a district and board to not either direct, endorse, or sponsor, I think is my main concern.
Well, that's fair.
To have a better understanding of what we're really putting in policy for, future interpretation. Ms. Voigt.
The one thing I'm thinking, that from what you're referencing, they do include the statute reference at the bottom, but I think the case law references that you have in our cover letter would be valid. Then we come back to this in 2 years or 4 years, and it's like, okay, this wording came from the case law decision that set this precedent. I think that would be, especially for coaches, because of this case, now we're looking at this through a different lens based on the recent, constitutional rights interpretation.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Sure. Thank you. So we would be tabling this for another
Sure.
discussion.
Yep.
I don't know if any other questions or comments on that, or.
The only thing I'll say is, I don't, sorry.
I was just gonna ask, do we need a motion to table it? There was no motion on it, there was no motion.
No, there was not. We're still, right. And it is an action item, so we would need a motion to table and move on. But Mr. Borowski is.
Well, I would just say, all due respect, I don't know that I share your views on, I think it's on it being vague, or, I mean, it seems like it's clear to me. So I'm just wondering, does Dr. Siebert and those working on this, are you clear enough on what Mr. Zenobia has issue with to be able to go back and address it and bring us back something that,
I think so. Yeah, I've
Okay.
tried to write down both what Mr. Zenobia and Mrs. Voigt talked about, and through Julie and I, we both take notes, right? So we'll be able to pull it together and be able to give our legal team just a little more guidance in terms of these specific pieces of what we're looking for. And then maybe we even have some kind of like a little brief that's written that kind of describes why they're recommending certain pieces of the policy or not.
Sure.
That would help us, and we don't have to wait 2 months for that. We can do that and start, getting going on it so that we're, hopefully by the time we come back in October, we have it in a good place for the committee. Yeah, that's not a problem at all. It's an important policy, so we want to make sure we get it right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
thank you.
Oh, of course.
Good. We have a motion to table. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so I would move to put this back on the table. Policy 8800, revisions to back on the table.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Voigt, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So we will move to table that for our October meeting. So let's move on to our next action item, which is policy 8405, environmental health and safety program.
All right.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry,
gentlemen.
point of clarification.
I really appreciate your
When
time.
did you say we would bring it back? October?
October.
We're thinking, yeah, October. Thank you, Dr. Seaver.
Yeah, of course. So this was another table policy from June. This is the one on the environmental health and safety program, and we made sure the link is working at the end of the page. That was hot and cold in June. It's now working. And we also added on page 3, the last page above the link where it's green, referencing diesel exhaust, we added the words at the end, when diesel fuel is utilized, based on the fact that we use propane buses, and we had that conversation. The one thing I couldn't get in working with all the different resources that I tried was any guidance on idling. There just wasn't any that I could find or that anybody was saying there is guidance on. So I think we just are going to have to trust that when we have diesel buses that are bringing kids to the district, that they're doing the best job in their professional opinion that they can in terms of getting those warmed up, before they have to take the kids home. So I couldn't find anything to help in that regard, but we did make sure the link's working, and we did add the part about diesel fuel being utilized to try to round it out.
Any other comments or discussion? Oh, that was the, kind of why we had tabled this last time, was for that very reason, I think. From my reading here now, I think we've addressed that, but any other comment or discussion on this? Policy 8405. All right, I would be looking for a motion then to approve this with the changes that had been made.
I so move.
Motion by Ms. Voigt. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Borowski. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 4-0. And with that, we're going to move on to our discussion items, the first of which, in our government relations portion, is our state budget update.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Zenobia. So the state budget was signed by the governor on July 5th, and it has some really nice provisions for the school district of Waukesha. Starting first, all districts, regardless of where they're spending, are getting $325 per pupil in each year of the biennium, which is pretty significant, essentially coming off of the last budget where we had 0, if you remember, in both of those years. And a lot of that was related to the ESSER funds that were coming into districts, and it was understandable why the state didn't necessarily always put more money forward at that time, but they certainly have this time, which has been great. And then the other thing that's quite impressive for us is the low revenue ceiling relief. And if you remember this sheet that we used when we went to the Capitol and also at the Expo Center for the Joint Finance Committee, one of the things we talked about with all of our legislators was our low spending, and being one of the lowest spending school districts in Waukesha County dating back to 1993. So last year we spent just a little over $10,200. So we'll get the $325 on top of that from the state, and then also have the ability to tax up to $11,000, like we talked about in F&F with those various scenarios just prior to this meeting. And part of that will come through the property tax levy, and then part of that will also come through state aid that goes directly to property tax payers. So what the numbers we were looking at in F&F, while we have the ability to raise revenue per student, it didn't look like it was going to have a significant tax impact on our taxpayers, particularly after we dropped our tax rate over 10% last year, even going up 5%, which is a conservative estimate, hopefully it'll be less than that, would only have a 4-cent, I believe, increase on the mill rate, which is, pretty non-significant. And then when you partner that with increases in property value, which we'll learn in the middle of October, lots of assessments, property value is going up. That means that base gets spread among all the property tax owners, so it's less impactful on each individual homeowner. So those are two big provisions for us. Mental health funding got added into the budget. Special education funding, currently we're right around 30% on the dollar. We're going up to about 33%, so a slight move in the right direction. That'll certainly help us. And I think, from my perspective, those are really the biggest parts of the financial budget. Quite honestly, it's really pretty interesting to see. I mean, the things that we advocated for are the things that happened. And so for a low-spending school district, and there are many low-spending school districts like us, it's a good budget. Certainly, not everybody loves it, right? But not everybody loves everything, right? There's always winners and losers in that game. But overall, I think it's positive, and it'll start to play out for us. We'll have our budget hearing on September 13th. F&F actually approved the preliminary budget this evening, which was great. And so we'll have that on the 13th, and then throughout the month of October, we get those pieces that we need. So we have, well, in the third Friday count, which is September 15th, we get our number of students. That's an important day. And then early October, we get our state aid estimate more finalized. Mid-October, we get our property values from the county. And then ultimately, we will set the levy and tax rate by the end of October. So the continual budgeting process that won't make sense to somebody like Mr. Borowski, who works in the financial field. We started our budget already on July 1st, but we don't finalize it until several months later at the end of October. But that's just the way that school funding works. So any questions on the state budget? I just wanted to kind of give you a high-level overview of the financial components. And I gave you a couple of different articles that kind of tried to explain those.
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so I think one of the most common questions I get from people about what I think about the increase centers around what is going to be the long-term impact to our taxpayers with the essentially into perpetuity increase of $325 per pupil every year going forward in terms of the increase to our revenue limits. I think there's a misconception out there that people believe the state's going to give us $325 extra for each pupil. And I've tried to explain to people that, no, this is just an increase in how much we can raise the levy. And first of all, I want to confirm that that is a correct interpretation of that.
Sure. Well, in this particular case, the 325 is coming from the state directly to us as a school district. Now, then we will tax beyond that to hit our revenue limit authority up to $11,000. But the 325 is from the state.
For
Now,
this year.
For this year and for the following year.
Right.
And as it's currently written for the next 400 years, right, which will probably get overturned by a future legislature.
So you're saying that the state is committing to giving the districts not just additional revenue limit authority, but they're actually committing to providing that much per pupil.
They're giving the 325 per pupil. Now, that goes into our calculation. So on 10.2, we put the 325 on top. Now we're at like 10.55, right? 10.550. Then we're going to have that gap that we have to discuss as a district of, do we want to levy our local taxpayers for some portion of that? Because then there's also that flow-through part that comes from the state directly to the property taxpayer. But the reality is that is money that comes from the state. Now, the flip of that, right, is that's tax revenue, right? So the state taxes people, the federal government taxes people, we levy as a school district, and we tax people. So it's tax money coming from people in the state of Wisconsin, but it is coming from the state.
But that would not, so just so I'm clear, that would not be a burden that would be placed specifically on the property taxpayers of our district.
Correct. It will not.
Each year.
Right. That's money
Even
from.
beyond this biennium.
But again, like that money is tax revenue, right? So it's
Sure.
coming from all of us.
Right.
So it depends how you dictate the burden. It's not a burden that's going to be put on our taxpayers by us.
Through the property tax levy.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. School funding has a lot of layers. It's a very unique animal. So all questions are good questions, and I've learned a ton, but I don't know that I'm always can answer even all of them, right? As long as I've been doing this. But together we can always figure them out.
So if I could just coattail that to further clarify. Right now, we're at 10,206, let's say 207 if you round up,
Sure.
per student. So we add the 325, we're at 10,532. We then can, I guess tax levy up to 11,000 if we so choose. And that's for fiscal year '24. That's,
This year, we're going to be in. Then the following year, the most we could be would be 11,325, because we're going to get that 325 again.
right, so, okay, that's what I was wondering, is that 325 being added to the 10,532 to get us to 10,8, and then we can just levy to 11? Or is that 325 being added to the 11,000?
It'll be added again wherever you're at after this year. So people that are under 11 in the first year can go all the way up to 11 if you choose to do
Okay.
it as a board. You don't have to,
Right,
but you can. And then if you do, the next year, the 325 comes on top. If you chose for whatever reason not to do it and you stopped at 10.5, then the 325 would go on top of that, and then you'd have the ability to go to 11, but which would then, if the revenue cap increases again, it could be 11,325 if they, but oftentimes they'll just leave it at 11, probably, because it hasn't raised.
right. So likely we're going to go to 11, and then the following year, we'd add the 325 to the 11,000.
Right.
Okay.
There's a lot of nuance in all of that, because that won't all, like I'm trying to explain how that won't all go on the tax rate. You know, like we're, part of that, the state always, even in the last biennial budget, when they gave zero directly to the school districts, they put money into the property tax formula to keep people's property tax down, so that, because all school funding is essentially small portion of federal, and then it's just like a teeter-totter of state resources and local resources. And so when the state resources go up, the local resources go down, and the opposite, right? If the state funding doesn't happen, generally speaking, the taxes at the local level go up. And so it's that balancing act of where does the money come from?
Right, and it's all working off a maximum. That's why it's a balancing act.
Yes, and this revenue cap was put in back in 1993, so that people couldn't just go nuts in terms of at the local level, you know, taxing their communities to death, if you will. And so at that time, it was part of what they called a three-legged stool. So there was the revenue limit to limit your spending, but then the state was giving you 2/3 funding at that time. That's when you saw a lot of the high school builds in the last part of the 1990s, early 2000s. That's when like 2/3 of your money was coming from the state, and you had the ability to do some of those things. You know, we did it here in Waukesha in '93, and then at West. And then the third stool of that three-legged stool was something called the QEO, which capped your salary and benefit packages for your unionized groups at 3.8%. So if insurance had a really bad year and went up, you know, the salary would be tiny, vice versa, right? You remember all this, Mrs. Voigt. If it was the other way, you know, the insurance was really low that year, you know, you could go up a little bit more in salary. But it capped all those things to keep everything in check. What happened over time is the QEO went away, no longer in, now we have the CPI, right, that we work with. And the revenue cap stayed, and the 2/3 funding hasn't been able to be maintained. So the revenue cap has been the one consistent thing, and so it was essentially a game of where were you in 1993? And in 1993, we were a low-spending school district, and so that's where we have remained for 30 years. And that's why when you look at like that chart, we're, you know, close to the bottom. Where other districts at that time, if they were spending more, that's where they got locked in. And so they've been able to increase over the years. Our increases started from a lower spot. So it's an interesting 30-year experiment now that you kind of look back on it, right? It's really, it is what it is. But this overall is going to be okay for us.
Ms. Farquhar.
I just want to thank Dr. Sievert for his explanation, not only to us, but to the legislators, to let them realize that we had been, you know, in this 30-year slump, you know, based on our being conservative at that point. You know, I was part of the staff at that juncture, and we picked up an extra prep, like instead of teaching 7 classes a day, we moved up to 8, just to try to, you know, tighten the belt, so to speak, to be able to pay for West High School. And you know, we were really trying to cut things as much as we could to make that new program happen. And all of a sudden they go, oh, where you're spending right now, you're locked in for the next 30 years. And it's like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, wow. Interesting. Yeah. So any other state budget pieces? Otherwise, we'll move on to the,
Just one question I had on the special education aid.
Yes.
That had gone up to 33%.
Mm-hmm.
And was at 30% for how long?
it was under, it was at 30 last year. I want to say before that, we were up in the, like, mid to upper 20s.
Okay.
You know, you'd have to go back, 50 years, maybe, for when it used to be 70%.
It started at 70%.
Yeah, that's quite a ways back.
Right.
It was in
So-
the law when it into effect.
Yes,
That was the expectation.
right. So I think over time, maybe that will continue to trickle up. Anything in the right direction helps, you know, certainly and we have some significant special education needs in the school district of Waukesha. I mean, we're transferring, I think, last year around, and you have to cover those costs, and we're happy to do it. It's just, I think last year it was roughly just under 20 million that we had to bring over from Fund 10, the general fund, to fund the special education needs in the school district. So, you know, even 3% helps you transfer less over, which gives you more money to spend across the system on all kids. So that's good too.
Mrs. Voigt?
On the additional benefits, it mentions the fact that this is the highest reimbursement rate for the state in the last 20 years. So this is,
Sure.
it's not anywhere near what everybody was trying to ask for, to get to like 60% and then get back
Yeah.
to, the rate that would be reasonable, to cover the expenses that are required by law. If the mandate's there, but the reimbursement for it isn't.
Right. Yeah, I know, I think our goal was 50%, that might have been a little pie in the sky, but we wanted it to be much higher. And I guess I'm curious, in number 6, the way it reads, it's saying it's estimated at 33%, but they'll create the estimate in the fall, and final payments and reimbursement rate will be available at the end of 23, 24, so it sounds like it could be higher or lower.
Most likely lower.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, most likely probably lower. It's not, it's a finite amount of dollars.
Right.
So depending on the needs.
So let's not get
across
too
the
excited
state,
then.
It can get, right, it can get spread out differently, and you could come in lower or higher is possible, yes.
Any other questions or comments on the state budget update? Let's move on then to our next discussion item, which is the legislative update.
Yes, so, thank you, Mr. Zenobia. So this one, we had talked at our last meeting about the early literacy / reading bill that was hot and heavy at the time, went through many morphs and adjustments over time, and ultimately was signed by the governor on July 19th as Act 20. So, Mrs. Voigt and I actually had an opportunity to hear from some people at the DPI at our last SWSA meeting. The DPI has a lot of tasks that they have to start unpacking as part of this process, part of which is creating the Office of Literacy, known as the Wisconsin Reading Center at DPI. They're going to create a council on early literacy curriculum, so there'll be 9 members on this committee, 3 nominated by the state superintendent, 3 by the Speaker of the Assembly, and 3 by the Senate Majority Leader. And they'll be the ones that come up with the list of acceptable curriculum. They're going to create a literacy coaching program through the Office of Literacy, the DPI is. They're trying to contract with 64 literacy coaches that will then kind of go to schools based on need when looking at your reading results. And we talked last time about the grants covering 50% of the cost of purchasing approved curriculum and instruction materials. That's going to be for curriculum and instructional materials, or in our case, maybe consumables that we use with our curriculum aligned to the science of reading after January 1 of 2024. So there's not going to be an ability to go back to try to claim money for things that you've already bought. That just won't, the money isn't there for that. And again, this 50 million is very similar to that special ed money. Like, it's 50 million, and so, when it's gone, it's gone. So you can apply for up to, I think they have 50 million designated for that, and you can apply for up to 50% of your costs, but there's no guarantee that you would get 50% of your costs either as that money gets spent. The big words are the science of reading versus the 3 queuing, right? So by 24, 25, the 3 queuing method teaching kids to base reading on meaning, structure, syntax, visual cues, memories is not going to be allowed. So the science of reading will be the strategies that has to be employed. And it increases, there's going to be more frequent assessment. The part on retention came out. Remember, there was a component on third grade retention. That came out. But there's going to be additional assessments that we will do with kids and put plans into place, including more in-depth summer plans that I think will be good for getting all kids reading, hopefully by the third grade level. And let's see if there's anything else.
It's going to be on the report card, too, passing that third grade test?
Oh, yes. So
That's
passing
huge.
passing the third grade test will be on the school report card. Thank you, Mrs. Voigt. And let's see. I think teacher preparatory programs at the college level, it looks like are changing as well. Really to have more of an emphasis on the science of reading, so that kids as they come out are more trained in that, and it's not just up to the local school districts to do that. So overall, bipartisan support for it, recognizing a need, right? What's more important than kids being able to read? I mean, we have one of our elementary teachers sitting here today. Sophie would agree with that. And she's wonderful at getting first graders, in your kindergartners in her case, to be able to read. So, yes, questions about the reading bill? That was the kind of the biggest one since we met. That's one that's got the most attention. There's a few little pieces going on, but I thought this one was probably worth our time diving into, as it's going to be a pretty significant shift in the state of Wisconsin.
Any questions or comments in that regard? Mrs. Voigt, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, the other one from SWSA that might be worth noting here is the idea of the teacher pipeline proposal from Brown Deere.
Oh, yes.
That's a proposal that's sort of grassroots from the SWSA.
Do you kind of want to explain that?
I printed it out so I
Good.
can.
Oh, good.
Monica Kelsey Brown, who's the superintendent at Brown Deere, has implemented a program that's been very effective for them in trying to be able to grow their own and try to help them to be able to be successful in the process of helping them to get their certification and helping them to then make a commitment to stay in the district afterwards. The proposal that she has put together works with paraprofessionals, and others that, might come in and have like three years in the district. And, they're showing potential that they could be the teacher themselves. And then to work with them through a master teacher to be able to allow them to be able to, what they call grow your own alternative licensing pathway. And, they have, like their model, what they've used is the individual, we pair it up with a paid master teacher as determined by the superintendent, the director of teaching and learning, and the principal. And that master teacher will observe the person trying to get the certification at least one day a week, while working in the classroom 4 days a week. So they've got that kind of on-the-job training, and be able to work with them through the steps and stages of being able to increase their salary as they become more proficient at being able to be at the higher level. Once they get the alternative licensure, it's not transferable. Like, it's good here in the district. So in other words, we've helped you get to this next level for potential earning, and now we want you to commit to stay here, that we get the return on it. And they've been very, very pleased with their success with this model, so they want to propose it because of the teacher shortages and the needs that are out there as a way to try to work with, paraprofessionals and others that might have, like a retired welder, that can maybe, get the certification kinds of things to be able to have a provisional license to teach a tech ed class, or a special ed paraprofessional, being able to do the same kind of thing. But, even an accountant to be able to come in and be able to teach the accounting classes. So trying to more and more to grow alternative place, people into some of those positions. Does that do justice for what you know?
Thank you, Mrs. Voigt. Do you have any idea if there's a time frame that they have for a contract that they hold them to? If they,
I think it was
5 years, I think.
5 years.
5 years?
I think so.
Before they'd be, like, released.
Sure. Okay. Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so Just so I'm clear, is there a piece of legislation that would allow all districts to do that?
That's what she's proposing.
Okay.
And they're trying to work through our lobbyist, SWSA, to recommend this.
But did Brown Deere get some sort of an exception or something that allowed them to create this program at their own district?
Are they actually doing it, or is it her idea? I don't know if I'm not sure if they're doing it yet or not.
Okay.
I'd have to do a little more research on that.
So at this point, the summary from the minutes from our meeting say SWA would like to move forward with drafting a bill around these ideas. So I thought that she's done it, to an extent, they've already been doing it,
Maybe
but I'm
has
not
tried to
sure.
do it a little bit, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to do exactly what Mrs. Voigt described without that being a law.
Right.
You know, or the
That was
DPI
gonna be my
changing
next
their
question, was
licensing.
How did they manage to create that carve-out for themselves previously?
Yeah, I don't think they're doing it whole hog, if you will. I think they're trying some pieces, and the thought is, can we get some traction on this to become, in the legislature, to give us more flexibility with hiring people to work in schools?
Mr. Borowski?
Yes, I'd just like to go back to that, the fourth bullet point in the bill, or at least the summary of it, where it says creates grants to cover 50% of the cost of purchasing approved curriculum and instructional materials. Now, I know you mentioned, so I know the district has purchased much of these already because we've been going in this direction already.
Yes.
And I know we cannot ask for the reimbursement.
Right.
But do we have a sense, I guess I'm not sure that we've purchased all of the materials yet, and do we have a sense of what financial burden, if you will, that's going to put on us moving forward, whether it's this year or next year?
Not off the top of my head, I don't, but we can get that. Do you,
I
Mrs. Voigt?
think they're going to cover the testing,
Yes, they are going to cover the
which,
testing.
which is huge, that's, it's required multiple times before the third grade to be able to, set the plan for how to be able to, get the kids on task or on, on the success path. But again, and some of the consumables maybe, depending on what the pot of money is left over. But yeah, it's hard to,
Yeah.
there's so many variables, it's hard to know what.
Sure.
What to
I mean, good news overall, for us. Like I said, we were moving that direction anyway. Good news for the students, really, to be doing this. It's just, it's almost like they're now sort of dictating, well, now you have to spend this amount of money on, or part of your budget on this, and I was just curious what that was, but we can find that
I'll
out.
do some work on that.
Yeah.
Sure. That's a good question.
I appreciate having the opportunity to meet with DPI, even though it was via Zoom. And I asked about the DPI link to the federal government, to DC, about the idea of special ed funding. Because IDEA is a federal law. And, we chatted about the idea that, yes, she's on wanting to go to that level to try to get reimbursement rather than the state having to pick up the reimbursement costs. Which, makes a lot of sense to me. So that's the
Yeah.
next thing that I appreciate that she was advocating for that.
Sure.
Well, it certainly is a step in the right direction, I think, for the state of Wisconsin to put all this together. I'm hopeful that it has the desired effect and begins to improve the outcomes of Wisconsin students, because it's certainly an area that needs that, so.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Mrs. Voigt.
And I want to compliment our teaching and learning committee that they did make that determination and make that transition ahead of the mandate to do it. Because there's a lot of districts that are like, I'm happy with what I have, and I don't want to be changing it. It's like, we don't have to have that, transitional kind of,
Yeah.
reaction to the legislation. We have already decided that it's potentially going to have a benefit, and that's what they're trying to have everybody else, start to realize.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Any other discussion on the legislative portion? If not, then I'd be looking for any recommendations for our future meetings. Mrs. Voigt.
One of the topics that is a very hot item right now, the governor is potentially going to call a special session tomorrow, is what I had heard, on early childhood funding. And it's a passion close to my heart because we have a daycare program at our church, and we've been lobbying, through this whole legislative process to try to get additional funding to be able to keep the daycare programs sustainable. At this point, a lot of centers are closing. Here in Waukesha, we realized, we lost the one over by West. You know, it's, we have a waiting list at our program that's just 79 deep, you know, for kids that, you know, are looking to try to get into it. So at this point, we're very pleased to have Representative Scott Allen come and spend 2 hours talking about that particular legislative initiative to try to be a champion for early childhood education, to cover, let the programs that are currently in existence get some funding to be able to pay their staff what, you know, what's appropriate. At this point, a lot of bachelor's degree, you know, staff, you know, can make a lot more money over at Walmart than they can, you know, in a position that's, you know, impacting these little ones, you know, especially, you know, birth to 3. And, you know, so the legislative initiative that Scott Walker's office is talking about is like a three-pronged stool, like that terminology that came up before. But have employers help to pay for childcare, you know, have the government kick in, and obviously the center itself, you know, through the tuition of the families that they're paying. We're trying to look at a different model to make more people eligible for to be employed if they have a place to take their kids, you know, that they can go to work. You know, it's kind of a win-win for the economy as well as a win-win for these kids and the foundation for them to be able to have the brain development that's going to help them to be better learners when they get to our programs at 4K.
So in your request, are you looking to discuss
Early childhood education proposals.
in the government relations part of it is the proposal?
Because
Okay.
this is a legislative initiative that they're, you know, definitely a hot topic at this
Okay.
point.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other recommendations? All right, well, that adjourns our meeting for this evening. Thank you all for coming. Have a great evening.